Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of the Isaac Newton Institute podcast. My name is Dan Aspel, and I'm the Communications Manager here at the Isaac Newton Institute. So our guest for this episode is Professor Rebecca Hoyle of the University of Southampton. She describes herself as an interdisciplinary mathematician working on dynamical processes in biology and social science. Now, we are particularly interested in Professor Hoyle because she has, for the past few months, been working on the Virtual Forum for Knowledge Exchange in Mathematical Sciences, or V-KEMS for short. Now, this is something which has come about more or less as a direct result of the COVID-19 pandemic and has involved collaboration between the International Centre for Mathematical Sciences, or ICMS, in Edinburgh, I&I itself, the Newton Gateway to Mathematics, which is a sister organisation of I&I, and the Knowledge Transfer Network, or KTN. And to put it in layman's terms, this is a way of helping people work together when they can't be together. So we hope you enjoy the episode very much, and Rebecca will be with us shortly. So, Rebecca, it's a pleasure to have you here, and it's a real thrill for you to join us. Anyone that's listened to these podcasts before will know that it's either been my voice or it's been the voice of Kira Dangerfield, who handled the last two podcasts with tremendous skill. So Kira's here. So hello, Kira.
Hello, I'm the Development and Communications Coordinator at I&I.
And yes, it's a double pleasure because I get to record with you and also speak to Rebecca. So, Rebecca, we wanted to talk to you primarily about the virtual study groups, which have been something of an innovation over these past few months. So can you tell us a little bit about them and how they came about?
Yeah, so study groups have been a thing for decades, actually, in the mathematical sciences community. And normally we would get together in person, and there might be a company or some other organisation, maybe a zoo or something, that had a problem that could be helped with mathematics, possibly solved using mathematics. And they'd come along and they'd present their problem, and then we'd work on that in small groups for a week, 5 days. And then at the end, we'd all meet together again and present what we'd found out to the problem owner, so the company or the zoo or whoever had the problem in the first place. And so, there would be a lot of coffee and pastries and people chatting and huddles and scribbling on pieces of paper and whiteboards and, fiddling around on laptops
So
together.
A perfect fit for I&I.
Yeah, all kind. Yes, an I&I type experience, and so so this was a thing that happened in person, and we'd obviously go to wherever this was happening around the country, and then lockdown happened, and we couldn't do that anymore. And yet, in many ways, there was even more of a need to try and solve problems that had arisen, some of them because of the lockdown, because of the COVID crisis, some of them maybe just because there are long-standing problems, the kind of bread and butter of study groups, really. And we set up an organisation. That's maybe a bit of a fancy term for us, really. We set up a group of folks and called ourselves V-KEMS, the Virtual Forum for Knowledge Exchange in Mathematical Sciences, and we did it online by trial and error, I would say. Some absolutely amazing, magnificent support and organisation from a great number of people. So Matt Butchers from KTN and Dawn Wesley from ICMS and Claire Merritt and Jane Leakes from I&I helped us to put together a kind of collection of online tools that we could use to do these same kinds of things, but in virtual space. So everyone sat in their spare room or their bedroom or their kitchen, many kitchens.
I hear they were more productive. Some people said they were more productive though, because they just sat there and actually focused and did all the work and got more done than kind of maybe, you know, going and having a little coffee and having some pastries. That was what some people said. I heard
that's a very dangerous question, Kira.
It's really, I don't really know, honestly. I'm not really sure. It's maybe a different kind of productive, right? Because I think you have to sort of fall back on your own resources a little bit more when you're working online together, because the kind of communication is much more kind of a little bit more staccato. You have to, there's more of a little dance, isn't there, that we've all learned over these months of how you interact over Zoom and how, or Teams or whatever, where you have to wait and then hear who's coming in next and then speak over each other and then say you're on mute and all of this kind of stuff. And so it's a different kind of working. So you do all that and then you kind of turn off your computer for a little bit and you do some stuff yourself and then you come back and then you share it. And I think that it is different from the way that you might work all kind of gathered around a whiteboard or a blackboard. I don't know if it's more productive or not. I mean, I think it's let people contribute who might not otherwise have been able to. So people who are physically a long way away. So we had somebody joining in from Iceland at one point, which was brilliant. And we had people join in who otherwise wouldn't have been able to because they needed to be at home with their kids, but they were able to contribute for a bit and kind of join in when they could and then, you know, go off and do the other things that they needed to do. So it fits around people's lives in a different way.
And that seems very telling, doesn't it? The fact that you're not sure which is more productive is tremendous. Because I think before this, if you'd said to people, do you think it would be as good? I mean, I'm presuming here, but I'm guessing the answer would be from most people, of course not, nowhere near.
I think, yeah, people would have been really lacking in confidence probably about what you could achieve in this kind of format. And I think it's a learning experience, you know. I mean, we had to learn that actually probably 3 days is mostly enough for folks, and you need to build in quite a lot of unstructured time so that people can take it at their own pace, because otherwise everyone ends up with a big headache just because of the staring at the screen for such a long time. So yeah, I think it's interesting that people have really learned to inhabit this online world and to do things productively in it, and to sort of cherish the things that are enabling about that, as well as be sort of aware of the things that are less easy to do. You know, you can't have quite the same level of throwaway comment on a Zoom chat as you can, you know, if you're next to somebody in the coffee queue.
Yeah, you're right. I am learning that because I've been out of rotation. I've been on parental leave, which started more or less the same time that the lockdown began. So if I appear rude or if I'm talking over people, it's partly my personality, but it's also partly lack of experience with Zoom.
Yeah, but you know, I think people have really got used to it. The more you do it, the more it's okay. And I think people are quite forgiving as well, because we all know how chaotic it is. And there's another thing as well that I quite like, which is that you see, this sounds really nosy, it is actually really nosy, but I really like that you see into people's kitchens and their spare rooms, and you can see all their clothes hanging up on their wardrobes that are in the spare room, you know, the winter coats that they're not wearing and all this kind of stuff.
And the occasional baby popping in to the side.
Yeah, and yeah, kids walking past, all the noises. And I just like that human aspect of that, actually. I really like it. And I feel like, in a way, almost there's a closeness that you wouldn't otherwise get, because people can't pretend in the same way. You know, it's different.
Yeah.
Can I just come back to the sort of topics that you guys covered in these virtual study groups? So you've had 3, is that right? Sort of. So you had like the practice one initially, the sort of small one. And you've had like 3 bigger ones that you guys have produced reports from that have kind of all been related, haven't they, to problems that have arisen because of the situation that we're currently in.
Yeah, so we had a pilot one that was kind of a business as usual type thing, and then we produced reports, I believe, for those. I wasn't so directly involved in that one, but that was to kind of, if you like, standard study group problems, just to see if it worked, and to just make sure that we could do it. And then we had one that was on unlocking the workplace, where we'd been approached at some point by DHSC to give a mathematical perspective on safely unlocking the workplace. And we'd written a really short report for them, and then suggested that we could hold a study group to explore that in a bit more depth. So that was our first kind of COVID related one, and sort of bigger, a bigger one. So we did that, and then following on from that, we felt that we could look at those kinds of issues around unlocking spaces from the lockdown in relation to higher education, partly because we're embedded in higher education, so we had that bit more contact with the people who were making decisions. And so we ran another study group on higher education specifically, and implications of COVID for how we would be operating come the autumn. And then there was another one on feeding vulnerable people, and that was a problem brought to us by FareShare. And then I believe that some of the V-KEMS crew also supported the European Study Group for Industry this year, which was based in Leeds. So that wasn't a V-KEMS initiative, but we were kind of helping, bringing people into our virtual world with all our funny online tools.
So can you just, for someone who's maybe never been to even a normal study group, can you sort of walk us through what these virtual study groups look like? Like, you know, who speaks? How do you go off and solve these problems? How do you decide what the problems are? Break them down. Sort of just walk us through how these play out.
Okay, so there's kind of a couple of different ways in which it can work. So the most classical way would be how it works for a normal study group, where there's somebody with a fairly well-defined problem. So they might come to you and say, well, we need to get, 15 boxes of widgets from one side of the world to another using the minimum amount of resources, and how would we do that logistically? I mean, obviously it will be a much more complicated problem than something like that, but they'd have a quite specific problem. And so at the very beginning of the study group, the people from that organisation with that problem would give a little presentation to explain what the problem was, why it was important to them, kind of in the context, what is it that they're trying to do and what are their constraints. So really trying to kind of set out all of the things that are important about that problem, the point, the reason to solve it, why it isn't trivial to solve, because every organisation has got constraints that mean they can only, they can't do certain things and they can do other things, and some things might be terribly expensive and some things might be physically impossible for reasons that perhaps are not immediately apparent. So they'd kind of set all that out. And then we'd have a mathematical lead who would then talk through how we might think about this problem mathematically. And explain as well the online tools that we're going to use, because although they're sort of intuitive, we have to walk everyone through them. So we'd walk people through the online tools, and in doing so, we'd normally do some kind of exploratory exercise to try and flesh out what are the mathematical issues involved in this problem, and maybe kind of break it down into 2 or 3 different things that we could work on within smaller groups. So we might have 25 people at the study group, and we'd probably break that down into groups of about 8-ish, because, you know, then you can work together online more easily. And so each of those groups working on some aspect of the problem would have their own set of online tools, their own kind of online world in which to go and explore this problem. And each of the groups would also have a facilitator, an academic contributor to the group who has done it before, who understands how the process works and can sort of rally people to the problem and kind of guide them through the process. And so normally there'd be maybe an hour or so of kind of discussion within the group of what are we going to do, kind of firming up the sub-problems a little bit. And then people would perhaps take a bit of a break, go away and do a little bit of work individually by themselves on things that they'd agreed with the group that they could contribute. And then at the end of the day, people, or, you know, at periods throughout the day, people come back together, discuss what they've done, figure out what they can do next, and kind of iteratively work on the problem. And then towards the end of the day, we present everything that we've done in the small groups to everybody so that people can see how the progress has, you know, what progress has been made across the whole group. And we do that for 2 or 3 days. Maybe we might have some further input from the problem holder, or sometimes we've had seminars from related groups that we could join in with to sort of vary things a little bit. And then eventually by the end of the project, at the end of the study group, we'll have produced a kind of presentation that summarises everything we've found out about the problem to present that back to the problem owner. And we have a set of presentations at the end.
So I think this link with the working directly with the problem holder is quite unique, I think, to these study groups, isn't it? And I think it's really important to it's very easy to get a question from a problem holder and then go off as a researcher and think, oh, this is an interesting question, and then kind of go off on a research track that can maybe end up to not being very useful ultimately to the problem holder. But in these study groups, the way that you do them over a short period of time, and also the way that you're having that continual input from either at one specific problem holder, or I guess, for example, with the higher education, I believe you had sort of a few different types of people who might be having different, so like vice chancellors or people involved in the actual organisation of higher education. You have them all kind of come in and give their perspectives and their challenges, so that you're keeping that in mind all the time as you're trying to solve these very specific problems, meaning that they're very relevant to the people at the end rather than just being some interesting research question.
Yeah, absolutely. We had people come in, all kinds of people. So we had a chief operating officer, we had a representative from a students' union, we had people dealing with timetabling, we had people dealing with estates, and we grilled them. You know, we had sessions set aside for them to be grilled. We called them Q&A, but honestly, the questions that they were getting were pretty detailed. And I think people actually really enjoyed sharing their perspective with us, you know, because we were genuinely interested to hear all the minutiae of what they were doing, because it was relevant to us to solve the problem. And that's not usually the case, right? People are not really usually interested in the minutiae of what you're doing. They just want the answer at the end. They don't, you know, it's just, so give me the timetable. It's not, well, how did you do this? And how big is this group? And how do we deal with this clash? And, you know, all of those kinds of very detailed questions are things that we really, really wanted to know about. So actually, that was great. And I think you're right that is what makes it special. And we also try and bring in people who are not mathematical scientists, who might have a particular perspective to offer. So we had colleagues from public health, in particular, for some of our COVID work, because it's very important to understand that these are complex problems that have very multidisciplinary aspects, and their solutions are going to be multidisciplinary. And perspective, diversity of perspective is really important to bringing out useful contributions to the solution. I don't feel like there is a solution really for most of these problems. So we're just helping, we're just making contributions that people might find useful. We're not giving some kind of definitive answer or version of reality or anything. We're just trying to help.
From your description, it seems like the amount of variety involved here must be quite inspiring for you as a researcher.
Yeah, it is. It really is. And I've really found it quite sustaining, actually, being involved in these over lockdown. And I think quite a lot of people have. I found it to be a very positive community, and people are very engaged because they want to help. And I think it's very psychologically supportive to all of us to feel that we're able to do something to contribute and help in some small way. And it is really inspiring. It's really interesting because it's very wide-ranging work, and you're hearing from really, a diverse bunch of people, and so it's just interesting. You get different perspectives coming in and learn things that you otherwise wouldn't have learned. But also, it's just really nice. It's been really nice, fun working with people in this way. It feels very constructive and productive and supportive.
I think your point about having an outlet for people to be able to feel like they're sort of contributing to the problem. I think that these study groups have also been very good to help bring in all the mathematical community, but not having everyone just think, oh, now I'm just going to build an SIR model and run it and have some way of saying, oh, we should be doing this or X, Y, Z. But it's a kind of a positive way to support the epidemiologists in the modelling community to look at some of the wider issues. Like, for example, the one that was done with Fair Share was looking at the fact that, there were all the problems in the supermarkets and distribution problems of food. And so it was completely tangential to a certain state of the actual COVID-19 pandemic. But it was a really important problem that mathematicians were able to sort of help provide some insight into the problem.
Absolutely. So food security, although you might not immediately think that was going to be something related to the pandemic, it has been something that we've looked at quite a lot, actually, over this time. We had a discussion forum about that, and we had the study group with Fair Share. And I think you're absolutely right that there are lots of different ways in which mathematical scientists can make a contribution beyond writing their first SIR model. There are other things to do, and there are so many other things to do and so many other ways that we can contribute. It's really nice to be part of a kind of organised endeavour to try and address some of those things, to feel like we're making progress on a variety of different fronts, rather than kind of all piling up in one place and possibly getting in each other's way a little bit.
And you've even worked, so at I&I, we've got this infectious dynamics of pandemics program currently running to sort of look at in a bit more detail the modelling behind the pandemic and control measures. And you guys did actually a sort of a joint event out of your higher education virtual study group, didn't you? That work then actually fed into the IDP program I&I, and I thought that worked really, really nicely. The way sort of work that you guys started then joined up with some of the work that people on the that are sort of advising the government and all that kind of stuff, that you guys will then started working together and looking at how your solutions feed into theirs. And I thought that was quite a nice sort of outcome of joining up of all these different bits that are kind of started to try and deal with problems at the moment.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that kind of patchwork of different folks looking at different things and then communicating with each other about what they've done so that we kind of join up into a bigger endeavour is great. I think it did work really well. We had really great discussions at that meeting with the IDP programme. And actually other work has come out of that. that we're going to take forward. So I think there are so many different ways in which we can work together. It's not just that everything is a study group, it's that there is a community of people who can work together in different ways and support across different communities to try and tackle things in a kind of joined up way, really. And actually that's also been fantastic, because I've made, in a personal way, it's been fantastic to make contact with people who I haven't seen really for years, and kind of suddenly find, okay, well, we're sort of working semi-collaboratively, perhaps not directly, but doing something that is indirectly helpful to somebody that maybe I last probably spoke to 20 years ago. It's really nice. It's fantastic, actually.
It was interesting to touch on there about the connection with the IDP programme. And I was curious to ask, this connection with I&I, which is one of the main reasons we're speaking to you now, was your experience of working with the people from I&I different to your experience of working with people from anywhere else? Because obviously you're still in the same room. What was it like for you? Did you feel like you've had an experience with I&I or with those specific people?
That is a good question. I think it actually is slightly different, and it's funny, isn't it? Because you're right, I'm still in the same room. But there's a kind of culture that comes with each group. I don't know if it's sort of fostered necessarily by the organisation, but it's just the grouping of people, the mix of personalities. There's a slightly different culture that each group has. And it, so the people who are directly advising the government, they've got a different culture because of the experiences that they have together doing that. And then the IDP folks have got their own culture that comes from such a wide-ranging programme. It feels sort of a bit more sort of fluid in a way, and wide-ranging because they've been doing it for a long time, looking at lots of different topics. And then the V-KEMS lot, we tend to work in short bursts together. And then we're not always the same people either, because we're a very, very open way of working, and we just invite anybody who wants to come and join in with us. So we work in a short burst with a bunch of people, and then we try and take that forward in whatever way is going to be useful. So there are those different cultures, and it does feel slightly different when you're interacting with them, even though you're still sat in your kitchen or your spare room or whatever.
Yeah. Kira, were there any more specific questions as the academic amongst us? Between us, rather, not amongst us.
Well, I don't know. I could talk to you for ages about what came out of the higher education. I think the higher education one was very interesting because you guys kind of broke the problem down, if I remember rightly, into looking at it kind of within classrooms, then movements on campus, and then campus and community. And I think sometimes as well, like you say, with breaking down with where maths can help with some of these problems, sometimes when you're faced with the people involved in running the universities are faced with these ginormous problems of how do we bring everybody back, there are so many issues and you don't even know where to start. And sometimes mathematics can almost be, it's just that logical step of thinking, okay, how can we actually break the problem down, look at things, different problems, focus on different areas. What can we say about this? What can we say about that? And I got the impression from listening to some of the people, some of the problem holders, I guess, as you would call them, or the stakeholders, is that they found that really useful and really helpful to just have somebody have some kind of idea of guidelines, of scenarios of what things they could try and do and think about doing.
Yeah. So actually, this is kind of something that I meant to sort of talk about earlier when I was saying there are different ways of doing a study group, and that normally or traditionally people would come with a well-defined problem. But what we've found is that in this kind of rapid response to COVID world, it's not necessarily the case. Sometimes people come with quite an ill-defined problem and they don't know how to structure it. And actually, we've done that structuring as part of the study group. And I think you're right that that's really helpful. And it was a bit of a leap of faith when we did it that way, because we weren't completely sure what we were going to come up with and how that structure, or if that structure was going to work. So we did at least part of that structuring actually on the fly in the study group. And I think, yeah, actually that may have been almost as much of a contribution as the actual mathematics that we did. The kind of.
So because I think it's just, that's the thing people often think with mathematics, it's like equations, and that you're giving like them some quantitative numbers of like, do this and 50% of people, this is going to happen. But actually sometimes the mathematics can be, it's just that way of thinking, that way of breaking down the problem, and that, which is a mathematical thinking, and where mathematicians can be really helpful in doing that.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's really helpful just to get different ways of thinking involved. Not that one's better than another, but just, just getting people to think about the problems in different ways is in itself helpful.
And are you taking on some work from that study group? Sort of, what are you guys are continuing it, right? You often, the work doesn't often end at the study group. Often you guys can continue.
Yeah. Well, no, and this one seems to have run because the higher education study group came out of the original Unlocking the Workplace study group, and then out of that came the meeting with IDP, and then out of that is coming, I'm doing some work with a bunch of folks from I think they were all in the study group. Yeah, they were all in the study group on testing strategies. And we may do some more events around testing as well. I'm not really completely sure. We haven't quite decided that yet, but it does seem to kind of run. So yes, normally there's a relatively well-defined problem, and after the end of the study group, you might kind of take it on a little way, decide kind of where the end point is and how you're going to take it forward, and do that in a kind of quite a structured way. And I feel like the world at the moment is very fluid, and it just sort of flows from one thing into another thing, with different people contributing, like some kind of giant river, and a giant river of mathematics and other things, other ways of thinking, all kind of trying to, or bringing it all together to find some kind of way forward.
That's a wonderful image and a wonderful way of putting it. Thank you, Rebecca. It's been really interesting hearing you speak about all of these topics, and unfortunately I think we're sort of nearing the end of a reasonable recording time, but there are a couple of things which I'd like to ask you about. One is a thing that we've started to do, it's become a tradition, mainly thanks to Kira, is asking if you have any recommendations of people who the listeners might want to follow to get any news about this kind of thing. And I'll leave that with you for a moment, because I want to spring on you the slightly less comfortable question, which is what we spoke to you before we started recording. We spoke to you about. You have pursued something a little different to this current work, and you've actually done some stand-up, I believe, and I would love to hear about that. So please tell all.
I did do some stand-up. I'm trying to remember who got me into doing that. It wasn't necessarily my original idea, but I have a colleague called Ellen, and she got me into doing something called Bright Club, which is stand up about your research. And it's terrifying, to be perfectly honest, but sort of also quite good fun if you survive. So you just write a little set about your research, and you stand up there in some bar and deliver it. And it is one of the most terrifying things I've ever done. And I did one about going to look at sand dunes in Morocco, and I did one about evolutionary biology, which is all about sex and death. And I did it at the Edinburgh Fringe in the end. And I think that's where it has to stop.
That's fantastic. Was the audience mainly mathematical, or did it bleed into the general public as well?
It's not necessarily mathematical. Bright Club's about absolutely anything. So there was this wonderful person who did a PhD on birdsong. She's fantastic, and she did stand up about her work on birdsong. So it could be absolutely anything. And the audience are not necessarily academics, although, you know, obviously people's friends and family and that come along. But yeah, some of them are just members of the public who don't know what they're letting themselves in for, really.
You said it was terrifying. Was it also enjoyable?
It's sort of enjoyable afterwards, like many of those things, you know, like maybe jumping into very cold water might be enjoyable afterwards. I'm not sure if it was enjoyable at the time. I think I almost had an out-of-body experience at one point. I found it really quite scary.
I can absolutely imagine.
Is there any way that this has been recorded and people can watch it? Or...
Someone will find it.
If there was, Kira, I certainly wouldn't tell you.
Again, I sprung the other question on you, which was perhaps slightly less intimidating, but is there anyone in your network or circle who's, let's say, active on Twitter or any other social media that people might want to follow? It could be you yourself, of course. You know, that's perfectly allowed as well.
I think the person who is most active is Alan Champneys. So,
okay.
And we will also, in the show notes, we'll put, because you're also on Twitter. I see you tweet quite a bit, don't you, Rebecca?
I am on Twitter. I'm usually quite quiet on Twitter, if I'm honest.
But we'll put in case people would like to follow you and find out more. We'll put your Twitter handle in the show notes if you want.
Professor Rebecca Hoyle, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. I wish you all the best for the future, and I hope we get to see more of you, not just on Zoom, but when the world returns to normal. It would be lovely to see your methods and the way you work take part in more I&I activities. So thank you very much for your time.
We should just say that we'll put all the information about V-KEMS and how people can find out more and find all the reports and stuff if they want to in the show notes.
Absolutely. Well, again, thank you very much for your time, Rebecca.
Thanks, it's been great talking to you.